And Dave Sussman back with you at Whiskey Politics, and I'm sitting here with the great Bill Whittle. Bill, it's a pleasure to have you back again. And again, we try to find the worst place for you to sit with us and enjoy, and you know,
just awful, isn't it? Unbearable. Yeah, so many people say, "Why do you live in California?" And you know, I mean, especially if you grew up in Florida, there's just no going back.
Yeah.
There's no going back. It's 65 degrees and it's beautiful like this every day. It's the best climate in the world.
Yeah, and if you live in Florida, you can have the sun, but you also got the big hair.
And yeah, get the big hair, and by 10:30 in the morning with that humidity, that sun starts pushing you into the ground. And it's
yeah. It's well, it's great to be with you. We just had you on a couple of months ago, and we just saw you last weekend at the Saving California event down at Burbank. A couple of things, and I want to get back to California in just a moment, but I wanted to get your perspective on the fact that there is, obviously, with what happened in Florida with the shooting, and we are seeing hundreds of thousands of people on the streets right now. Are you concerned that there is an energy that is shifting now regarding 2A or gun control?
I'm not too concerned about it, and the reason I say that is because this entire Parkland thing was so astroturfed, you know. I mean, they were. I hate to say this, but I genuinely believe it's true. I think they were just waiting because these students were just immediately leapt upon and put in front of the cameras, and so I don't think it's a sea change in public opinion. The whole idea is, I mean, it's understandable, but there are two problems with this whole Parkland argument, right? And one of them is that availability of guns leads to these mass shootings. Look, when I was a kid, you could buy a gun in any hardware store in America. You could walk out of there with as many guns as you had money for. You could buy them anywhere. And as far as what they want to say about, oh, well, it's, you know, playing with guns, we played with guns. They had cap guns, cap pistols, Daisy BB rifles, all the time, everywhere. And we didn't have these mass shootings. And what's changed since then is that guns have become much harder to get, but these shootings become more prevalent. So it's not the guns. It's clearly not the gun. You know, availability has gone down, and number of shootings has gone up. So what is it? And I think the only two things that are here now that weren't there before, when guns were everywhere, was to some degree the sort of the fetishization of violence. I was a film editor, filmmaker, and the scene in the bank lobby in The Matrix is just it's. I would say that 3 minutes is one of the 5 best 3-minute segments ever committed to film. It's absolutely, utterly spectacular where they go shooting up. But it's gun porn. Yeah. You know, it's violence porn, and sometimes you look at some of these video games where players are just simply gunning people down on the streets. So there's a desensitization aspect to it that has something to do with it. But by far. The major problem is this 24-hour news coverage and the glorification of the shooters. And this isn't just my opinion, although I had that opinion. Park Dietz is a forensic psychologist. He's probably the expert in the world on mass shootings like this. And Park has said, here, if you want to stop these things, here's what you have to do. Never mention the victim's name. I'm sorry, the shooter's name. Never mention the shooter's name. Never show his picture. Never, ever do a body count. Never do anything you can to glamorize or glorify it. And the guy who did the Parkland shooting had a Facebook post, and he was talking about a previous school shooting, and his direct quote was, "Man, I could do so much better." So you have to think about what really is going on. I suspect what's happening is that what used to be just a bunch of suicides, people who are suicidal, none of these people expect to survive these things. You know? I think if you're a suicidal person now and you've decided you just really don't want to live anymore, maybe life's just been so hard on you and you're so filled with anger or loneliness, now you have a choice of, well, maybe I'll just do suicide by cop. And if I'm going to do suicide by cop, why don't I get myself on every single TV screen in the entire country, probably in the world? And here I am, a nobody that the world has ignored, and now my name is on everybody's lips and my picture's everywhere, and they thought I was nothing. Well, I showed them. And this is precisely what this forensic psychologist says. So it's a 24-hour news coverage, and every time that they do this, they're glorifying the people when in point of fact that they should never ever show their name or face. And then you take away the motivation for these things because these people are motivated for this.
Okay, so I had DC McAllister on the show a couple of months ago, and we were talking about this to a certain extent. And up until about the late 1990s, in 30 years, our childhood and upbringing 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was one mass shooting like this. Okay, starting in 1998, Columbine, I think it was.
Columbine started everything.
And then now we're seeing this on a periodic basis where it's become the new norm. And we're disgusted as adults, and as parents, we're petrified over this. You talk about video games, you talk about movies. What switched? What happened in our culture? Because I had an interview earlier today. I was talking with somebody about Death Wish and Charlie Bronson. We had violence in movies in the 70s.
But it was different. It's a different kind of violence. Death Wish is kind of in that transitional period, so let's go back to John Wayne, let's say.
Okay.
And the cowboy movies and the westerns we all grew up with.
Right.
John Wayne would shoot somebody, pow, and the guy go, and he'd fall off the horse.
Yeah.
You know, or he'd go, and they'd just fall down. It wasn't slow motion of bullet shell casings and guys just getting riddled, and it wasn't fetishistic the way it is now.
Right.
It's great filmmaking, and I don't mean to suggest that films or video games make people go out and commit these crimes, because if I believe that, then I would believe that there's no such thing as free will or responsibility, and I do believe that there is. But I do think what you're doing is you're kind of widening the available number of potential shooters by both of these things. You're making it more likely. You've got 320 million people here and more guns than people.
Yeah.
And when you get down to the actual numbers, you familiar with Six Sigma? It's a manufacturing standard.
Yes.
Okay, well, if you were, I don't mean to reduce it to such bloodless terms to minimize it. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to get just a perspective on it, some kind of handle.
Explain.
Some kind of handle. So Six Sigma, so basically a standard deviation is a statistical analysis of how likely something is on a bell curve. Mm-hmm. And the further away you go onto the sides of the bell curve, each standard deviation is a sigma.
Right.
And when you get all the way to the far, far narrow little ends of the very, very few people who are very, very bad and the very, very few people who are very, very good, or products or whatever, that's 6 standard deviations called Six Sigma. And Six Sigma in manufacturing is a standard that says that we are going to have for every, I actually don't remember the numbers, but it's something like we're going to have 1 defect in 10 million products or something like that. So it's a very high bar to clear. And if you look at the U.S. population in terms of mass shootings, we're easily Six Sigma. In other words, the number of these things, given the population and given the number of guns in this country, is actually vanishingly small. But when you have 320 million people, and when you have a culture that becomes daily more obsessed with fame, the motivation for these things, and the video games and the movies, I don't think they so much cause it as they give somebody a sort of a vicarious sense of the thrill of it. I have video of some clips from Grand Theft Auto, where the person doing the shooting is the player, and the computer's running all the people, and it's photorealistic. It's very, very good. And one of them is set in Santa Monica Beach, and and you see this guy, the human player, some kid someplace somewhere,
just
gunning down people, not for points or anything. And in the background is Casa del Mar. I mean, I had lunch and dinner behind that window there.
Yeah.
And this guy's just going down the streets and just blowing people away. And sometimes he'll take a baseball bat and just club women on the beach, just club them to death and hit them 15, 20 times. That doesn't cause people to become mass murderers, I don't think.
Broken machines that are watching it.
That's it. That's exactly right. Somewhere in the margins, the people who used to be in the margins are getting pushed into committing these kind of acts. That's the push. The pull.
Right.
We used to have a lot tighter society in terms of personal connections. It strikes me that many of these people don't have personal connections. They always a moody loner, or either. Yeah. But when we were growing up, you tend to know them either at school or church, or you'd begin to realize that these people were there was something really quite wrong with them, and I don't think those social ties are as strong anymore.
So we've got, obviously, again, going back to what we were just talking about, Florida just happened. It's a month out of Florida. We've got hundreds of thousands of people. You're talking about AstroTurf, and I certainly, there's definitely credence to that. But there is definitely an energy, and there is an energy towards taking some kind of corrective action, and whether that's gun control, new laws, whether it's, I don't quite understand what it is that they want to happen other than the extreme people saying repeal of 2A. But here's my question for you. When I take a look at some of these people that are speaking out on the side of quote unquote common sense gun reform, okay? You had this young teenage girl, and for some reason, all of a sudden, teenagers are now being given the platform to dictate what society should do.
Funny how
they want
that
to change
works.
economic systems, and
Funny how that works.
17, right?
Right. So they're going for the credibility of the victim status.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So what was it exactly you're trying to?
So my point is that the people that they're putting up on the pedestal, this young girl with a shaved head,
Yeah.
I watched her. She's got a Cuba flag on her jacket, and she's standing up, and it's turned into a left wing rally, and you see a lot of people in the audience, and so my question for you is is that energy something that is concerning to you, or is there a flip side that can actually help folks, and whether you're a Second Amendment proponent or a conservative, and looking at that and thinking to yourself, because you got the elections coming up.
Yeah. It obviously concerns me anytime I see something that I think is just plain wrong and irrational. It concerns me. But I guess my off-the-cuff answer would be, I think people's minds are pretty much made up on this issue already, and have been for quite a while. Uh-huh. One of the parents that was that showed up after Parkland, and I cannot be clear enough about this. I want to state this as clearly as I possibly can. I am not trying to criticize this man who lost a child, and God knows, I'm not trying to direct this comment at him so much as at the idea. But he basically, I heard the audio, and he said, all right, so we had Columbine, we had one, and then we should have fixed it. We had one mass shooting, and we should have fixed it. We should have fixed it. And my thought was, well, why did we wait to Columbine? Why didn't we fix it after Abel was murdered? Because what he's basically saying is, why didn't we stop insanity and murder? That's what he's saying. Mm-hmm. Why didn't we fix it? And now you get down to the part of this equation that is the hardest part to understand, but is the most important part. And that's simply this. Our life in the first couple of decades of the 21st century in America has become so safe, so secure, so prosperous, that the idea of anything happening to us prior than dying in our sleep at 103, surrounded by loving relatives, in balloons, anything other than that is considered an outrage, as if murder had been banished. And we feel the same way about young people dying of cancer or an automobile crash. So it's a tragedy. It's what can we do to stop it? But the world doesn't owe you safety, and it doesn't come with legislation. There is a fundamental defect in human nature. And as I said with the Six Sigma example, it's a very, very small defect, especially in this society. Very small defect, but it's there. And to say that we have going to come up with some laws that are going to eliminate people from murdering people is it's unrealistic, and it's infantile. That's the only word I can come up with for it. It's infantile.
Which isn't a very appropriate word, because we are in fact relying upon the opinions of the emotional children.
Yes.
And they're being put on a pedestal right
Exactly. So let me give you like an example of what I mean in terms of these expectations. As we record this, it's been 17 and a half years, almost 18 years, since there's been a plane crash in this country. A crash of let me rephrase that, a fatality from a plane crash. And I mean, I'm talking about a large jet. I'm not talking about the little commuter jets. But there has not been a major, there's not been one fatality from a crash of a jet in America since the end of 2001.
Okay.
There's 40 million flights a year. 40 million flights over 17 years is astonishing. Mm-hmm. Now that does great deal of credit to aviation standards and techniques, and I'm a pilot, so as we say in aviation, the aviation regulations are written in blood. Mm-hmm. We learn something from this mistake, so we try not to do it again. But that level of safety is so exceptional that we simply can't accept the fact that plane crashes are part of life, that things like that happen. And the thing that bothers me so much, the thing that worries me so much is that we expect that somehow we can legislate ourselves out of insanity, murder, rape, arson. If we just only explain to men that rape is a bad thing, This is kind of the progressive idea. We need to explain to young boys how bad rape is, and then there won't be any rape anymore. And that's infantile. Yeah. And not only is it infantile, it makes rape more likely, because the one thing that I have come to believe after studying history my entire adult life is that the only thing that stops bad people is good people who are willing to do bad things.
Like we saw in Maryland last week.
Yes, where there was going to be another one of these mass shootings.
Right.
And a gentleman stepped forward, and I've forgotten his name, but I should have it memorized because I know the names of the two guys that did the Columbine
You know why
shooting.
it's not memorized?
Because he's a hero.
He's a hero, and the media...
And he basically invalidates their entire part of the argument.
Right. And so we're talking about maybe having a couple of maybe retired military folks or security forces or even teachers who are willing to be trained at that level. Right? Listen, I've got a son in high school. There's multiple buildings at the high school. There's several thousand students. So one guy standing out front's not going to stop the whole thing.
No.
Right? But if you have one teacher in every building that has been voluntarily trained and enjoys that ability to be trained, and how many children would be saved over this?
Well,
they don't want to answer that, though, because
no,
that means that they will say, well, yes, there's a problem, and we can't fix it other than...
This is it. How many times... I mean, have you ever gone to a bank where there's not been an armed guard there?
No.
You know why? Because there's valuable things in a bank.
Yeah.
Because we value what's in a bank. And when we value what's in a school the same way, we'll start thinking about it this way. But that's not the point. You see, that's not what the left is lathered about. The people on the left, and this is the majority of the people on the left, who are simply just good people who want good things. They don't want these murders, don't want to have to worry about these murders. They don't like the idea of teachers being armed because it on some level, if you accept that might be helpful, then you have to accept the fact that murders do happen. And they don't want to accept the fact that murder is the problem. So they've created this talisman in the form of an AR-15, and the belief is if we throw this thing into the volcano, then none of these murders are going to happen anymore. But the thing I don't understand is, you have 16 people shot or whatever the number is in any one of these mass shootings, and everybody's insane about this gun control. But this really gets down to the point here, really. This is the issue. And all of the machine goes into action about gun control, while during 1 month, when the guy did the shooting in Vegas, he killed 60 people.
Right.
In that month, there were 59 people killed in Chicago. And that's every month. And that's Chicago.
And that's St. Louis, and that's Atlanta,
Baltimore,
and Detroit,
and
Baltimore.
D.C., all of it.
Right.
Right. And these places have extremely strict gun control
Yes.
laws. So what that's telling me is we're not interested so much in murders as we're interested in who's being murdered, and that's where we're going to go out there and we're going to blow the trumpet. And when you get down to really looking at the basics of this, I've come to believe, again, I'm not talking about the people that are launching these movements. This is a politically oriented thing for left-wing goals, and I understand that. But I'm talking about the people who sympathize with these kind of things.
Right.
Look, I sympathize with them too. You know, I think probably one of the most amazing insights I had came during a question and answer period for me, when somebody said, well, you know, why are you opposed to free health care? And I said, if health care were free, I'd be a liberal on health care. What kind of a jerk would I have to be to say no health care for you if it were free? But it's not free.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So most people just want to believe that it's not possible, and I think the reason people get lathered about mass shootings when they don't seem to care much about the mass murders in inner cities is because they know that if they don't go into inner cities, they're not going to be murdered in inner cities. But these things could actually impact their lives. And since this bubble of security that we have now is so airtight, this is one of the things that is actual threat to them it's an actual threat to their lives. And so they want that eliminated too, the same way they want disease eliminated and murder eliminated and car accidents eliminated. And look, I'm in favor of all of I don't want anybody to die for any reason. You know, anything we can do to suppress these things within reason, I'm in favor for. Things like, you know, airbags and seat belts and crash zones, crumple zones, sidebars in cars have taken highway mortality through the floor. It's terrific news. It's great news. But you can't expect to not have car accidents. You cannot expect that of you. And the number of people who are killed, number of young people who are killed texting and driving is many, 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 many times greater than the number of young people that are killed in school shootings. So it's also not about the number of deaths. It's about this idea. And I suspect that the reason the left wants to believe this so much is because they believe that legislation and government will solve any problem, and conservatives realize that no, there are some things that simply are immune to laws. And just to wrap this up, the thing that is so just mystifying to me is you've got a person, in the case of the Parkland shooter, who's willing to commit the most heinous act in the inventory, right? In the entire inventory of human behavior. He is going to go out there and mass murder children. And he's going to be deterred by a sign that says, no guns here? Is he going to be deterred because there's a restricted parking zone? He doesn't care. He's not coming back from this.
Last question on this issue
Sure.
for you, and it pertains specifically to Parkland and the resulting agenda that's coming out of the left and the folks that want to impact gun control. And that is this. The kid was 18 or 19, okay? And we talk about an AR-15. In 1968, federal law mandated that you have to be 21 to have a handgun. A vast, vast, vast majority of murders in the United States that happen with guns happen with handguns, okay? Minority sliver happens with rifles, semi-automatics, or AR-15 types as well. But why not raise the age from 18 to 21 for rifles? Let's say have a carve-out for parents that want to take their kids hunting.
Well, nobody goes hunting. Nobody that I know goes hunting with a semi-automatic rifle. An AR-15 is not a hunting weapon.
Okay.
And I happen to own one, and I don't own one because I'm worried about a deer coming through my window at 4 in the morning. And that doesn't concern me much. I own a pistol for home defense, and I own an AR-15 for neighborhood defense. And that's a hard thing for most people to understand. There is the entire crime argument and the self-defense. One of the I think one of my favorite videos that I ever did was called "Number One with a Bullet," and you look at America with by far the highest gun ownership rate, double the next closest country. We should have the highest murder rate per capita in the world, but we don't. We're not in the top 10.
Right.
And we're not in the top 20. We're not in the top 50. We're not in the top 100. Out of the 211 countries, we're 111 in terms of per capita murders. But I'm not even worried about, I'm not even saying that the main thing is the deterrent effect caused by the fact that in well-to-do neighborhoods where the stuff is, right? This is where the expensive stuff is. There's virtually no crime. And the reason there's no crime is because the law is enforced, neighbors are engaged, but virtually every criminal knows that if he's going to go into somebody's house around here, he's likely to get shot for it. And that deterrent effect is what works. And my wife is from Russia, and one of the many cultural differences with her is when she came to our apartment, now our house has got a door with decorative glass on both sides. And she said, "Billy, this lock is so small. I mean, it's just a tiny little deadbolt. In Russia, there's steel doors. There's 3 or 4 of these things. Bolt, bolt, bolt every night." And she said, "Somebody can just come through the glass." And I said, "Honey, the glass isn't there to stop people. The glass is there to wake me up. The gun is there to stop people." And that is not something I have to flash around. I live in a nice, safe neighborhood because people understand that this is not a place where you're going to get away with these kind of things. So when you start talking about a specific weapon, you are again getting into, I keep coming back to this word, but it's what it is. It's a fetish. And the most ridiculous thing about it is, well, first of all, the first of these mass shootings that everybody else copied. I remember the name of the 2 shooters from Columbine. You're never going to hear me say them, but I know their names.
Cleveland?
I'm not going to say them.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, but you're correct.
Okay.
But that happened during the assault weapon ban, right, where it was impossible to get any of these things. And so what they do is they say, okay, well, we're going to ban this kind of thing and that kind of thing, detachable magazines. So they come up with the bullet button, so it's not a detachable magazine because it requires a tool. So you push a little lever and the magazine comes out. Now they've changed the laws here in California. They've decided that the pistol grip is the problem. So now you can buy an AR-15 without a pistol grip, and it has a detachable magazine, which means you can reload much faster. And this is what happens when you have idiots designing gun laws that are trying to eliminate an aspect of a weapon when the weapon's not the problem. And I have to be so careful about what I say. I don't want people to think I'm flip about this. I understand all of this is incredibly painful stuff. But look, if I was going to go shoot up a group of people in a room, I wouldn't take a rifle. I'd take a bunch of semi-automatic pistols. You can move much faster that way. And it's the concentration of all of the rage and all of the frustration and the sadness and the grief onto this one weapon image, because that allows people to say, That's the problem,
Okay.
and that's something we can control, right? We can control that. We can just stop manufacturing them. We can ban them. We can recall
And
them.
it's a
Whatever.
scary-looking weweapon, right?
It's a scary-looking
It's a
weapon.
scary-looking weapon. But Donald Trump sitting in the White House, he had some senators sitting around him, and he said, 18 to 21, I want to seriously look at that. And then he had a meeting with the NRA, supposedly, and he comes out and he says, yeah, maybe not. Talk to me about 18 to 21 for that. What is the problem with that?
We decide that 18 years old is the standard for you being an adult, right? And we all know, if we really think about it, that there are people who become adults before 18. Not many, but some people you would say are adult.
Most don't until 25.
And most are 25, 30. Some never
Right.
do, right? And these people go on to become socialists. But legally, we have to draw a line somewhere, at which point you become, and your 18th birthday is the point at which you are considered an adult. And when you become an adult, you have adult freedoms and adult responsibilities. And I don't see any reason, I certainly don't see any preventative reason why making a AR-15 only ownable at 21, I don't think that's going to make any difference whatsoever. And by the way, when people talk about these common sense gun laws, things like background checks, no weapons to felons, no weapons to people with a history of mental illness, all of these other radical things that they want to impose, these laws already exist. And they've existed all the time. And these laws have been in place for all of these mass shootings. All of the things that they're talking about really are in place. And it, strangely enough, doesn't seem to matter.
But the Florida kid, he bought his gun legally.
Right.
He's 19.
Okay. So do you actually think...
Now, he fell through the cracks, right?
But look, let's just take your argument, because the best way usually to defeat an argument is just to grant the premise, right?
Okay.
Let's say that this kid was living in a state where you had to be 21 to buy an AR-15.
Right.
Does anybody think that's really going to stop a kid who was called 39 times? The police investigated this kid.
Right.
Does anybody actually believe that this kid's going to say, "Well, I'm just going to wait," or "I'm going to wait till I'm 21"? The defect is not in the law, and the defect is not in the weapon. The weapon in the hands of, again, 300 million people. There's hundreds of millions of weapons in this country,
right.
and like the planes that don't crash every day.
Yeah.
Right? No one really thinks about the fact that so many hundreds of millions of Americans are armed to the teeth, and they don't do anything with them, and they don't cause any damage with them. And it's ironic, it's not ironic, it's indicative that all of the focus is on the NRA, when in point of fact, the NRA is the only organization that I'm aware of that is constantly held responsible for the actions of people that are not its members. I don't know what the murder rate among NRA members is, but I'll bet it's zero. I'll bet it's real close to that.
You have to have a bogeyman.
That's what it is, right? You have to have something to throw into the volcano.
Yeah.
This is a fundamental human emotion. It's a human need.
Right.
That's the whole point of a sacrifice. Sacrificial virgins, sacrificial people, sacrificial this, sacrificial that. Are you familiar with sin eaters in Irish culture?
No.
Well, they would have an Irish wake, and they believed that all the sins of the person was going to go with them and send them either to hell or purgatory or heaven, depending on their behavior. And for quite a while there was a period where they would hire somebody, usually a very, very, very desperately poor person, and this person would come at the wake and would eat the sins of the person. That's what they did. They essentially took on the moral burden of the deceased's sins onto themselves. They took the sin. And people believed that this was actually the case. They ate the sin for a price. So now this person who's died is free to go to heaven because this person has assumed the responsibility and the sin for this. And this is what we're trying to do. That's how we control it. We live in such a... The wolf is not farther from the door in this spot than there is in any place on the face of the earth. Southern California is as far away from the harsh reality of life as it gets. And and I can't come back to this often enough, I would like the whole world to be like this. I'd like everybody in the world to sit in a world of comfort and security and not have to worry about any of this stuff. But people aren't built that way. And the reason that we are feeling so safe here is because of many things that were built into the structure of this country that are invisible in the same way that the electrical system and the sewer system is invisible. We walk around our city and we don't think anything of the fact that we go to the bathroom, we go to the toilet, we throw a switch and a light comes on. We don't think anything about it. But under our feet is this enormous structure, incredibly complex structure of sewer lines, electrical lines, and so on, telephone lines, communication lines, that are maintained, that allow us to go through life in this very carefree fashion. But those things have to be there. And beneath the structure of our society are philosophical grids,
right,
that are easy to attack because they're invisible and because nobody sees them. But if you take them away, you're going to know it.
That's a little scary. Talk to me a little bit about, and some of it you may be repeating from last week, but many of our folks watching won't have heard that, where California in 2018 is. We've got a massive election coming up with a new governor and this and that, and what that portends for America as far as culture, the economy, and so on and so forth. It's a general question,
sure,
I know.
No, it's a great question. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, it seems like almost all of the good ideas that this country had started in California and migrated eastward. Mm-hmm. Virtually all of the aerospace companies were based in Southern California. Grumman, Boeing, Northrop, Boeing was in Seattle, but Hughes, all of these high-tech aerospace companies, all these guys were based in California. And obviously Bill Gates and
Steve Jobs,
Steven Spielberg, all of these people grew up in a California that basically, if you really just want to put it in a capsule, is kind of Ronald Reagan's California. It was a California that was running budget surpluses, and they could afford to give free college education. Nothing's free, by the way. College education isn't free, and it's a mistake to call it free healthcare, free education. But you could get a college education in California during those years without cost to yourself, because the state was running a surplus. The state was making more money than it was spending, and so it could afford to pay for the education of people at no charge to them. And this was so effective that we took it for granted for so long that we assumed that all of the things that we did to get to that place we could play with and change with no effect. And this is why now all of the bad ideas in the country start in California and move to the West. I think progressivism to me is overripe fruit. I have a theory that I basically call King of the Hill theory, and I'm trying to get to the California thing, but this is basically what I feel. Let's say that here's increasing human happiness. Okay, I just want people to be happy. It's really all I want.
Okay.
Happiness, activism.
Okay.
As we move forward in activism, people get more and more happy, and as we get more and more active in things like freeing the slaves and empowering women and minorities and gay rights and all of this, as all of this activism increases, more and more people get happy. Mm. But my position is, as a conservative, is I think you pass peak happiness. And now continuing activism makes things worse. Now it makes life worse for people, makes things more difficult, more miserable, and so on. So I'm a conservative because I want to go back to a time when we were at peak happiness. When black people were not allowed to vote, when there were Jim Crow laws, I was a liberal, and so was the Republican Party, which was called the Black Republican Party. The Republican Party was invented to end slavery. The Confederacy was the Democratic Party that left the Union upon the election of Abraham Lincoln because they knew slavery's time was running out. So just the fact that you're progressing doesn't mean that progress is good. You can progress past the top of the hill and move into areas that are now actually regressive in terms of human happiness. EPA is a great example. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a beautiful, clear day here in California. I got here in 1988, so that was 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I first got here in the summertime, I was working as a temp as a temp at Enterprise Rent-A-Car in Beverly Hills, and I was living in Los Angeles for 4 weeks before the air cleared enough for me to go, my God, we're in a valley. There are mountains around here. This is an actual valley. Because you couldn't see
the smog was...
It was white cotton.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those days are gone.
Yeah.
They're gone, and they haven't come back because of aggressive work by Air Quality Management District, which is kind of the same thing as the EPA. So when the EPA is existing to do things like pull mercury out of rivers, and the Great Lakes used to be just sterile pools of sludge. Yeah. And when jets would take off, it'd be like black eraser smudges. You and I remember sitting in traffic and seeing cars idling and little puffs of blue smoke coming out of all of the exhausts. Well, to the degree that activism is cleaning up the environment, I'm a liberal until we get to this point. And now we live in this beautiful, clean environment, and that's great. But we don't stop here, do we? Now we have to keep going because the progressives have to keep doing something. They have to keep, it's asymptotic. You have to do more and more and more and more work to get a smaller and smaller and smaller result. And so now the job of the EPA is to make sure that people can't run their business. Now the job of the EPA is to make sure that you have to conduct a $70,000 site survey to make sure that there's no arrowheads in this particular area or whatever the case may be. And this isn't protecting the environment, and it's a form of the. That's why I become a conservative. So you take the EPA starts, and it does great work. This country is much cleaner than it was when we were kids, much cleaner. This idea of the earth is dying, this country is far cleaner than it was. And I was in favor of all of these things. Until you get to a point where you've got a clean environment, at which point it's time for the EPA to basically say,
okay,
thank us later. But that's not what happens. The EPA continues to grow in size and budget, and so they have to spend more and more money, more and more effort on smaller and smaller things, and they're making things worse. NASA's budget in 2006 is about the same as it is now in 2018. The only difference is in 2006 we were flying space shuttles. We were flying 3 of them in 2006. And now we're not flying any, but we spend the same amount of money. It's strange, isn't it? That the space program, with this enormously expensive, complex launch system called the space shuttle, is still taking as much money today when we can't get into space at all from NASA. We have to ride with the Russians.
Right.
It's NASA spending as much money now as they did when they were actually a space program. And now that we're not a space program anymore.
And that's due to?
That's due to the immortality of bureaucracy. And this is why California is such a bad model for the rest of the country. California led the country, I think, in all of these things that you and I would both agree on. And when people say, why are you conservative? It's like, I'm trying to conserve classical liberalism.
Yeah.
Right? Private property, freedom of speech, all this stuff. These are not progressive ideas.
And those aren't taught anymore.
No, those are the reason they're conservative ideas now.
Right.
They used to be liberal ideas. We all used to be liberals.
Right.
And then we got to this point of maximum freedom, and as the progressives tried to take things further and further and further, it got more and more and more regressive. So now the idea of free speech, which should apply to everybody, is now being used to silence people. And the EPA, which used to clean up the environment, get mercury out of the water, is now being used to keep people out of business and enforce fines and so on. And so the example of California is that once you put these bureaucracies into place, they never die. And California can be summed up in a nutshell. And the nutshell sounds something like this. Businesses are leaving California because the taxes are so high. Therefore, our revenue base is smaller. Therefore, we have to raise taxes. Right? That's the whole thing.
It makes sense.
In aviation, we call that a death spiral. Right? In aviation, when you're disoriented and you start to bank an airplane, you come back harder and harder. You think you're pulling up, but you're just tightening the spiral. In you go.
Right.
It's a death spiral. And this wouldn't bother me so much if it turned out that Californians leaving California because of their economic policies would go to Texas and then realize they're going to Texas because Texas works. I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
The problem is Californians leave California because of their policies. They go to Texas and then they start voting like Californians and they start turning Texas into California. And that scares the living daylights out of me.
Yeah, and I actually wrote an article about that, and their Silicon Valley is now taking a look at doing tours with Silicon Valley companies in Ohio, in Pittsburgh, Midwest area, Michigan, because, hey, friendlier business climbs, and it's cheaper living for our employees that don't have to afford $1 million 2-bedroom house in Palo Alto. So it is going to be spreading, and that's why I wanted to have this discussion with you here. But so you talk about that tipping point, right? So we all want clean air, we want clean environment, okay, all for that. But when you pass that tipping point, and now you're getting to the point where you're having this extremism, and that's what I classify
as
sanctuary states, sanctuary cities. But we just heard recently, I think there was a small city here in Orange County that says, yeah, no, we're out. And other Orange County cities are now talking about this. Buena Park, I think, was one of them as well. Do you think there's a fight left in California to turn it back?
I definitely do. You know what I like best about being a conservative? Because I started out as I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't know if my dad was a Republican or a Democrat until I was 18. Politics were never part of my life, and I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
I wanted to shoot down communists at supersonic speeds and then lead Mars missions. Then I became a theater major, and I started believing what everybody else believed. But the thing that I like most about being a conservative is I get to say one thing and do the same thing. I don't have to
consistency.
have yes, I don't have a conflict. Yeah, a bunch of attack helicopters over the coast. There's 4 Cobras out there.
Oh,
Yeah, good.
very cool.
Good. So what I mean by that is this: I get to say what I believe.
Yeah.
And the problem with progressivism, you've got a bunch of politicians. Let's take Nancy Pelosi, Jerry Brown as an example, and Dianne Feinstein.
Yep.
They say, well, we shouldn't have any borders, and we shouldn't have walls, and we shouldn't have locked doors. Everybody should be allowed in. Okay. My response to them is, or Jessica Alba and the rest of these celebrities, my response, Zuckerberg's a great example, Mark Zuckerberg.
Okay. Yeah.
So Zuckerberg says we shouldn't have any immigration problems at all. We should just let anybody in, whoever wants to come in. And my answer to you would be, well, where do you live, Mark Zuckerberg? What's your address?
Right.
What do you mean? I want to know your street address. Well, why do you want to know that? Because I want to go around town. I want to go around the entire state. I want to put up a poster that says that Mark Zuckerberg's house is open to anyone.
Yeah.
And that at any given time, you can go to 4209, Crescent Drive or whatever, go on in, raid the refrigerator, sleep on the couch. You're welcome to be there all the time, anytime you want, because Mark Zuckerberg doesn't believe in laws or doors or locks or anything. And now you get down to the brass tacks of the hypocrisy of the progressive movement. Zuckerberg does that because he thinks it sounds good, makes him sound like a very caring and very noble person, a very smart person. But his house he bought all the properties around his house to create a no man's land. That's exactly what it is. It's a no man's land. The second somebody puts the tip of their toe on Jessica Alba's property, private police are there instantly to respect the law and the door that she put there.
With guns.
So exactly, with guns. Men with guns are going to show up to protect them. Men with guns protect Dianne Feinstein while she's giving an anti-gun speech.
Right.
And when you question her about this, and when you question any of these progressives about this, what they'll come down to, the argument when they're finally finished is, yes, well, but I'm an important person.
Yeah.
I'm a senator. I'm a movie star. I'm a governor. I'm an important person. I'm not a regular person. I'm an important person. So my life deserves to be protected by armed men with guns because I can afford to pay them. But the idea of you being able to defend yourself is repugnant to me, and this is the place that I get really interested in the psychology of it. And I suspect that the entire gun control movement, really, when you get down to the brass tacks of it, is the same as all the rest of the stuff, like sanctuary cities and all the rest. It's a perk. Being pro-gun control is a perk.
Interesting.
Of being a very wealthy liberal elitist. What it basically says is, I think violence needs to be eliminated from our society and guns should be banned. Except, of course, for the guns in my personal security squad, which I have full-time around me because I'm a very important, very, very valuable person.
Right.
But the idea that a common Joe should be able to defend himself is repugnant to me. He might use that gun to shoot me, but even then, it detracts from my perk. And when you look at how they behave versus how they speak, you find that this is their position on all of these issues. All of them. Taxation, sanctuary cities, gun control, all of it. In other words, let's take somebody like Dianne Feinstein or Nancy Pelosi. Guns need to be controlled, except for the men I have behind me who are armed to the teeth to protect my personal life.
Yeah.
Taxes need to be very, very high. But I'm going to call my accountant and make sure that I pay the absolute bottom of the limit. Go to the line and keep your toes over the line, but don't go any further. In other words, we definitely need to raise taxes on everybody, but I'm a multimillionaire, right? So, and I want every deduction I can possibly get.
Right.
And sanctuary cities, the state should be an open house, and anybody should be able to move in here anytime they want to. Who are we to say that there are such things as illegal people? But if you step on my property, the private police are going to get there before the public police, and they're going to take you away. And all of this is virtue signaling that they can afford to do because they are covered by the things that they're trying to ban other people from being.
So if I'm following what you're saying, that stems from ego. That stems from an insecurity. That
stems from pride.
That's pride. That's
pride.
Sitting. That's getting seated in first class 20 minutes before everybody else.
That's it.
And let everybody walk by them, right?
Why do you think people? Why do you think that? Throughout all of history and all of human culture, around the planet, throughout time, politicians have been despised. From the first time people were able to write things down, politicians have been despised. Why do you think that is? I think it's because they're people who understand that it is easier to control people than it is to do the work on your own. It's easier to tax a business than it is to run a business. Yeah. And if I shake a few hands and knock on a few doors and I get elected to power, then I get all the things you just mentioned, right? I get to be called the honorable person from the great state of this, and I get limousine service, and I get free airfare, and I go on press junkets, and I do all the things that I could never do as a private citizen if I had to do this on my own.
Yeah.
Do you think that Joe Biden could not only not run Walmart, he couldn't run a Walmart. You know, he just doesn't have the chops for it.
Which is why you see Sacramento, most of Sacramento, because it's mostly a Democratic-run city now, controlling every aspect of California. But much of D.C., especially the entrenched bureaucracy, never have run a business, never have made a payroll. But it isn't that they look at that and say, I can't do that. They look down upon that.
That's exactly right. It's beneath me. That's precisely exactly why politicians are so despised. Because they understand that if you're willing to tell anybody anything that they want to hear in order to get their vote, then they will get all of the perks of success without having to go to all of the work that success requires. And once you understand that, things get very clear. For example, coming back to the California example, if you talk to young people who've been socialized by people like Bernie Sanders, renowned socialist, who owns 3 houses. Isn't that strange?
Yeah, and his wife is in
No,
trouble.
but just look at that. Don't you find that just a bit odd? That a man who says that the idea that we have so many deodorants is repulsive and that rich people need to pay their fair share. Don't you find it odd that this champion of socialism has 3 houses and that when he's not in the other 2 houses, he's not opening them up to homeless people? Don't you find that odd?
Yeah, the Castros aren't living in
Don't
poverty.
you find that Fidel Castro died with $900 million in the bank? Don't you find it a bit of a statement that the richest person in Venezuela is the daughter of the populist socialist who's worth $4 billion because her father managed to convince these rubes that we need to all share and share alike?
Yeah.
Okay, so once you understand this, it makes sense. And when I have young socialists talk to me about this, what they'll basically say is that the evil people, the bad people, go into business because they want money, and so that's what attracts all the greedy people and all of the immoral people. And in order to run a business, you have to provide service to somebody. You don't get to take their money by force. You have to convince them to give you your money. And you have to provide the highest quality at the lowest possible price. That's what a businessman does. And they will say that the good people go into government, the evil people go into business. Well, this is a testable hypothesis, as it turns out.
Right.
And the way you would test this hypothesis is this. If the good people went into government, then here in California, we'd have excellent roads and relatively modest retirement salaries. Because out of the goodness of their hearts, the government people would spend the people's resources on the roads, and they would take just enough for them to be able to retire, with relative comfort. That's not what you find here. You find third world roads in California, and you find crumbling infrastructure, and you find retirement packages that are double the private sector, which means that their theory is wrong. They may want to believe it, but it's wrong.
They're building a homeless shelter just down the hill here, right next to the ocean. Malibu.
Right.
Homeless. Well, if you're going to be homeless, you might as well be homeless here. But
it's a nice place. If you're going to be homeless, just be homeless warm, right?
Right.
Santa Monica is a great example of homeless.
Santa Monica.
Santa Monica basically says, look, we're going to be, the Santa Monica residents are all telling each other, we're so incredibly morally advanced. We have such deep feelings for the plight that these people are going through, that we're going to make Santa Monica kind of a sanctuary for homeless people. And they do.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, every homeless person in the country is in Santa Monica, and Santa Monica suddenly realizes, wait a minute, and they start pushing these people out as quickly as they can.
So you've got open immigration advocates here in the state. You've got everything run by the Democrats, as we've just talked about. Yet you say you're optimistic. Why?
I wish I could tell you I think the entire problem with our society today is that everything is too easy, and that we don't understand that life demands from us certain things, and that life is offering us no guarantees. So when people talk about the future of California, Californians especially want that future to be positive, and they want it to be cost-free.
Okay.
We want all the benefits. We don't want to pay any of the taxes. I don't think that's going to happen at all. My optimism for California is limited to the fact that I suspect that California is going to lead the way into the ocean, and that a catastrophe of California becoming bankrupt may prevent the absolute unmitigated disaster of the United States as a country and then the rest of the world economy following it. It's so common to hear people, especially politicians in California, talk about California being the richest state in the nation, when in point of fact we're the poorest state in the nation. if you use standard accounting practices that every single entity on the planet uses, assets, liabilities, black ink, red ink, by any measure of realistic accounting practices, this is the poorest state of the union because our debt load is so high.
And the pensions.
But you never, ever, ever hear that. All you hear is about the revenues of California and all the wealth that we generate, and nobody talks about the red ink that gets added to every year in California and in the rest of the country. So California, I suspect, is going to fail first because it is the birthplace and the home sanctuary of these terrible ideas that are promoted by a very small number of people who want to control other people's lives. The reason they're so much into gun control and not crime control and not murder control, the reason they're trying to ban AR-15s is they understand that AR-15s are the means of the American people resisting control from a political elite. And that's why they're against it. That's why it offends them so much. Because if they were really worried about deaths and murders, they'd be doing something about Chicago and Baltimore and St. Louis and all the other places. The idea of an AR-15 is offensive to them because it is basically saying, yes, I'm a little person. I'm not the governor, and I'm not the senator, and I'm not the movie star, but I am determined to defend my own life and my own family's life, and that is very, very offensive to them on some level. So all of these bad ideas start here, and they're going to come to fruition here first. As a great example of why I think California is going to be the hope, this is my highest hope, is that it's going to be the catastrophe that presents the disaster, or maybe it's the other way around. I forget what the line about Gladstone and Disraeli is. These two British prime ministers were at war with each other, holding office back and forth, and said, "What?" And somebody said, "What's the difference between a disaster and a catastrophe?" And Disraeli said, "If Gladstone fell into the River Thames, it'd be a disaster, and if somebody pulled him out, it'd be a catastrophe." But this small failure may be painful enough to prevent the large failure. But certainly this can't continue. And this is something that most people just don't want to think about. They don't want to think about the fact that this can't continue. You cannot continue to spend money that you don't have.
Right.
You can't continue to tax people, a smaller and smaller number of people who have to work harder and harder and harder so that other people get more benefits. That simply won't last. And everybody knows it. And I think maybe to conclude this idea, this is the breakthrough idea for me in terms of understanding things. And I have to tell you, it was very hard for me to get to this place. But once I did get to this place, everything became very, very clear. In California, it's not that they don't understand that high taxes are causing businesses to leave the state. It's that they don't care. They understand perfectly well. They just don't care. In other words, if the state of California or whatever government legislative body can issue a $200,000 fine to a company whose truck driver did not secure something adequately that is called environmentally dangerous substance, because we fed 15 pounds of this stuff to a guinea pig over 3 days and it turned out it got cancer, right?
Right.
So if the state of California issues a $250,000 fine, let's say, to a company, and that fine causes that company to go out of business, and the 7 people that company hires all lose their jobs, I used to think, what's the matter? Don't they see this? Then I realized, no, of course they see it. They just don't care. They don't care. They got their $250,000. That goes into the state fund for the pension plan and retirement plan. They're retiring on $250,000 a year, and they don't care. And it's not an easy thing to come to grips with, because people like us have a hard time imagining the psychology of that. But once you get there, everything else makes sense.
You can go on forever. We're being attacked by the killer support dog, lapdog things.
I think we've been here so long that they released the hounds.
Release the hounds. Release the lapdog hounds,
right,
and we're burning daylight here. Audio folks that are going to be listening to this on our podcast won't know any difference. But thank you so much for your time.
I had an absolute blast.
Yeah,
absolute
Bill.
pleasure.
Where do people find you again?
Everything's at BillWhittle.com, and we're a member-based company. And the sad truth of the matter is that I've been seen by 40 million people, and then somebody linked my guns video, and then I got seen by 35 million people on Facebook in 6 days. It was my entire career.
Wow.
Yeah, in 6 days.
Holy cow,
But millions and millions
That was
of
just last month?
Yeah, just last month.
Yeah.
Millions of people have seen the work I do, but we're kept afloat by 3,000 paying members. 3,000 people who just put their money where their mouth is and become members at BillWhittle.com.
Okay.
And their $10 a month is what keeps the shop open. So.
All right. So BillWhittle.com. Follow you on Twitter as well at Bill Whittle.
Yeah.
And I think you got a Facebook page as well.
We do.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks.
So good to talk to you.
Likewise. Thanks.